kind of go over a little bit about myself. I'm going to share my testimony, my journey through foster care, and then adoption, and kind of a little bit of just about where I am now. We'll do some practical parenting tools, some behavioral strategies, and then follow up if you guys have any additional questions or whatever. I'm pretty easygoing, so if you guys have questions in the middle of it, feel free to like unmute and ask me a question. I like all the participation as much as possible. So why I'm here. So for me, I grew up for a long time not sharing my story. I didn't want people to know the challenges I went through. I really felt like I did a good job of forgetting about the past and making a future for myself. But within the last probably 7 to 8 years or so, I've had a lot of people approach me and ask me to share my story. And I realized quickly that part of my purpose was to enhance the people around me. And so one of my goals in life has always been to make an impact on each individual I touch. If I'm improving the quality of life in the individuals that need it the most, then I'm doing and I have a purpose for helping other people. And so as people have asked me to share this, I have become more open to the idea because I do feel like once you understand the journey of some, it's easier to help. So that's a little bit about why I'm here, why I'm doing this, and whatnot. So a little bit, more just about me. Like Jacob said, I am currently the director of an autism clinic in Pittsburgh through Integrated Behavioral Technologies. Over the next couple months, I'm kind of transitioning out of that position and going to help with some initiatives with integrated behavioral technologies. I really felt like I had kind of a calling to go and serve a population that I could serve better. And so next year I will be teaching at a school for residential students. So I'll have my own classroom with 7 to 10 kids that are all placed in residential that have come from very traumatic backgrounds and such. So that's a little bit, I spent 8 years doing behavior consulting. I had my own autism classroom for several years. So I kind of have a wide range of experiences as far as kids with diverse needs. The last 16 years, my focus really, though, has been on autism, and then doing presentations and things like this for foster families or caregivers and things like that. I have my bachelor's from Pittsburgh State University. I got it in psychology with a developmental disability emphasis, and then went on and got a master's in autism from KU and a second master's in special education. And then as well as a certificate in behavior analysis. I am an OASIS parent coach, and so that is where there's a 16-week modules that you go through, and I go and work with families through problem behaviors and things like that. So I do that as well. So that's a little bit about me, my professional journey and all that. This is, my family. So I've been married to my husband for 11 years. We have 4 kiddos, 3 of them that are biologically ours, and 1 that we adopted out of foster care ourselves. So I feel like because I have that kind of full circle, my experiences has helped me to better understand foster families and kind of what they're going through. It wasn't until we adopted that I really understood the stress and what it took and the toll it takes on families. So in 2020, we adopted our little girl here, and she became a part of our family. So I'll share a little bit more about that adoption as we go through. But this is my husband, Jake, and then we have my daughter, Brecklin. She's 10. My son, Braden, who's going to be 13 this year. And then my other son, Beckett, he's 7. And then the one we adopted is Brinley. So these two, the two littlest, are 3 weeks apart. So we learned a lot in a quick amount of time. So jumping in kind of into my story and going through it. Like I said, if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me. So I was the youngest of 10 kids. Before I was even born, there was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of things that were occurring in my family that I'm not even aware of. And so that early trauma. Oh, sorry. Okay, hey, I'm on a meeting. Can you go in there and I'll be back in a little bit, okay? So sorry. I knew one of them was going to walk in this room. Sorry about that. So I was the youngest of 10. There was a lot of early trauma, neglect, loss that had occurred. I only actually know 3 of my siblings. And the one, so this is about the only picture I had of me as a young child. But this one right here in the red, would have been the one that was the next closest to me. And he died when he was, I think, 9 months old or something like that. He was just a little bit older than me, died because he was being watched by one of my siblings in the bathtub and had drowned of an accidental drowning. So that initially kind of started the process of where we would be placed into foster care. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of people watching over us. There wasn't a lot of just parenting going on. So my sister and myself would have been placed in a foster home, while my other 2 siblings were placed in a different foster home. We were separated early on, and so I didn't actually have a real close bond with any of my family or any of my siblings. My bio dad would whoops, there we go. He would eventually get custody of me because my mom was the one that was supposed to be watching us at the time. So up until about 3rd grade, he was raising me. He would get remarried. I then would have 2 additional half brothers and 2 stepsisters. Life until this point kind of felt pretty normal because I really didn't understand what normal was. I spent most of my time outside, which, as parents, we are always like, go outside and play. Well, this was the beginning of kind of where I felt some trauma. So we weren't allowed to come inside. My day was to be spent outside all the time, with only being allowed to come in for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner during this time would consist of a bologna sandwich or a hot dog. 2 things, and to this day, I cannot and will not eat because I was forced to eat those for every meal for years. I I would move around to a lot of different homes during this time. We never really stayed in a consistent place. So by the time I was in third grade, I'd probably been to 7 or 8 different schools. Um, but I really, again, like I said, I didn't know that this wasn't normal. I thought that this is what every other kid did. I didn't really have friends. We didn't do sleepovers. I don't remember having childhood friends up until this point. And about the third grade, there was a day that I remember, much like a lot of us remember 9/11 or COVID, and everything shutting down. So I was sitting in a assembly, school-wide assembly, and there was a ventriloquist little puppet thing going on. I remember being really interested in like how it worked and like being engaged in the assembly. Partially, part of the way through it, um, a principal and a school counselor would come get me in the middle of the assembly and take me to her office. It was there that I want my biological mom, who I had not really been a part of her life for the last several years, would be sitting in the office, a school counselor, and a principal. At this point, this is when I learned that that I wasn't going to live at home with my biological dad anymore. I was told that for the rest of my life, I was going to go live with my mom and that I would never see him again until I was 18. As a 8-9-year-old, this was a really confusing time for me. And I didn't understand. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know why they would tell me something that made absolutely no sense to me. I would later then find out that my dad had molested my sister. So, because of that, they pulled me from the home and put me through therapies and things like that. But the next year or two of my life would become much of a blur. Like I said before, my mom lived, she wasn't a very well caregiver. She didn't watch us. She had a lot of mental illnesses herself. And so her ability to take care of us wasn't really there. I learned through this that I had to grow up, and I needed to grow up quickly. I watched as my brothers and my sister that would eventually come live with my mom, but not live with my mom. So they were in and out of the home, but they were teenagers at the time. So they kind of had their mind set up in how they wanted to live their lives. So I watched them run the streets. I watched them gangbang. I watched them steal. I watched them do drugs. Like I saw all these things that my siblings were doing. And I realized, kind of at that point, that was a point in my life where I said, I'm not going to become this person. I'm not going to become the person that my brothers and sisters are. My brothers would eventually end up in prison. They both have been in and out of prison several times. I follow them on social media, but again, I've never really had a relationship with any of them. My mom was she lived in poverty. We lived paycheck to paycheck off of food stamps and her social security checks. I, at 8 or 9, would run all over the neighborhood. I remember picking up cans, and at the time when I lived in New York, you could trade those cans in to get 10 cents or something like that, just so I'd have money to go buy a candy bar. Um, but the biggest thing I learned during all this was that I was going to have to take care of myself, and if I wanted anything, I was going to have to do it myself. Um, During this time, my mom was required to stay in New York where we were living at the time for a year. Um, and then after that, then we were able to move somewhere else. So then we would then up and move to Missouri. So after that year, the court said she was fit, and we moved to Missouri. So this time I moved to Missouri with my mom, and then the brother that was not the one that had died, but the next closest one that I knew had moved there as well. So we moved in with my uncle, and we lived in a fairly okay neighborhood. I began to make friends. I had friends around the neighborhood that I would go and hang out with during the day. Um, Life was a little bit different because I had other people to be around. Um, but it was still not a super great home to be in. The home was infested with cockroaches. I remember my mom being so poor but so addicted that she'd be rolling cigarettes and I would help her roll cigarettes. Things that, like, as a child, most kids shouldn't have to experience. Um, we lived there for about a year and a half, and then we up and moved to Kansas. Um, I would find out that my brother had been, hold on just a second, sorry. I would then learn that my brother had been molested by my uncle. So, in order for my mom to keep me, that meant we had to move. My brother would end up in a residential facility, and experience a lot of trauma and stuff himself. So we moved to Pittsburgh, Kansas. Again, we in the middle, before we could move, we lived in homeless shelters, things like that. My mom, not being able to take care of me, ended up moving back in with my biological dad. So a lot of, this is up through 5th grade. So in this period of time, I had been to 7, 8 different schools. I had moved into 3 different states. Essentially, we were, hopping around trying to um, make sure we kind of went unnoticed. I am the only one that my mom had custody of, and the rest of my siblings had kind of moved on and were doing their own things and whatnot. So we moved to Pittsburgh, and I lived with my mom and my biological dad for about 6 months before I get picked up by the police station. So an officer comes to the house, picks me up, says, "I'm taking you into foster care." I'm getting ready to go into 6th grade at this point. So I remember, they like going into the police station and they have no place for me to go. So I sit in the police station in the basement of the Pittsburgh Police Department, and there's a whole bunch of computers around, and it's me and a police officer, and he's typing up paperwork. Well, I'm just sitting there waiting for whatever's going to come next. Um, couldn't tell you the police officer's name, couldn't tell you any of those things, other than I remember like him trying to joke around with me, and them just frantically trying to find somewhere to place me. Later that night, probably 9 o'clock at night or so, they would have found in an emergency placement, and I had to bed to sleep in that night. So that first night, I remember, going to this home, them asking me like if I wet the bed, just some basic questions. And then I stayed the night, woke up the next morning, and they had rules and things that they required all their kids to write out daily. So I do that. And they tell me, okay, they found you a home. You're going to go live with a foster family an hour from Pittsburgh. So again, I move and I go live with this family an hour away. So through this time, I meet the family. They have kids about my age, a son and daughter. And this is the first time I kind of have like a mom and dad that are like, ask me questions about myself. What do you like? What do you do? Like, what are the things you're interested in? And, but me not really having many experiences, not a whole lot to share. My life up until this point was just kind of survival. Going into foster care, I had terrible teeth. I had cavities on all four sides of my mouth. My front teeth were completely rotted out. I had abscesses. I had a whole lot of dental work that needed done. I was really malnourished. As a sixth grader, I was wearing like size 6 clothing. I didn't have anything that I came into foster care with. And I really just didn't have a lot of things anyways. So I remember some of those like first times of going to a store and getting out to pick out a new set of clothing for the first time. But going back to like my dental work, I would have to spend the next 6 to 8 months going and getting one side of my mouth fixed at a time. Because of how much work I had to have done, like it became so traumatic for me to go to a dentist. But this was the point in my life where I was given a little bit of structure. They had rules, they had guidelines, they had expectations. They sat as a family to eat dinner. They had cooked meals every night. These were all things that previously I really never experienced. And so it was hard for me to understand why they would have all these expectations. I remember being angry because I would want to stay up late, or I wanted to go to bed without brushing my teeth, or like I just didn't understand all these rules. But they were the first ones to give me opportunities. So this is the time they enrolled me in basketball. I began to do activities that other kids did that were my age. And so for the first time, I felt like instead of being the adult or having to raise myself, somebody else could raise me, and I could have just be me and be a kid. So like I said, it was my first time experiencing basketball. They lived out in the country, so jumping hay bales and fishing and doing all of those activities that maybe a normal kid would do, I was finally getting to experience. Um, I was very immature for my age. I wasn't at a seventh grade um, level as far as academically and maturity. I spent a lot of time talking in, baby talk. And so this was a time where I had to learn to trust those around me, learn those social skills, how to build relationships, how to trust adults, how to get along with other people in the home, things like that. Um, so I lived with this family for a year, and then they found out they were expecting a set of twins, and that they weren't going to be able to foster anymore. So I then would move to another foster home the beginning of my seventh grade year. Uh, I had a lot of people up until this point starting to invest in me. I remember one particular social worker signing me up for a basketball camp. And basketball and cross country and running and sports and things would be an outlet that I was able to be good and excel in. And so my foster family that I went to was again back in Pittsburgh. And so once again, I'm moving to a new school. It was a time where my mom was trying to get reunification and get custody of me again. And so even though they lived in a different district, I went to the district my mom was going to live in. So I do remember the day that I, came to this new foster home. They had went and bought me brand new sheets, had a whole like toiletries out for me. They were had like I remember having a whole section in a closet. I remember having my own stuff that was my own that nobody else could have or share. And so this family took me in as their own and would eventually go on to adopt me. But it took several years to get to that point. Like I said, my mom was trying to get custody again. And for me, I had learned that I needed to advocate for myself. So I would go to the court and talk to the judge myself and tell him that I didn't want to go home to my biological mom and that I wanted to stay in the home that I was in because I finally had stability. I finally had a set of parents that cared for me. And so they would later on about my going into my ninth grade year, they got guardianship of me and would become my forever parents. At the time, they said, well, hey, we can adopt you if you want as well. And for me, it wasn't about a last name. It was about them like being my parents. I developed a relationship with my biological mom and was able to, be able to talk to her about where I wanted to be in life and how the people that I lived with were the people that could give me the opportunities that I needed and the opportunities to get to where I needed to go and, my goals. So, to this day, I, am grateful that she signed over her rights. I realize that's not something that every parent can acknowledge. But I do realize that was probably one of the harder decisions for her. But she was able to put herself aside to allow them to raise me to become kind of the person I am today. So this is the time, opportunities where I am, able to play basketball and run cross country. I'd become, a 3-sport athlete. And I was really not that girl that people knew as this foster kid. I put that all aside, and most people had no idea. And so I shared this picture here just because this is my parents. They had been foster parents for 45 years, and they just recently retired as foster parents. And this picture was from the retirement party with all the kids that they adopted and then my kids. So that's I just shared that just because I think it's important to see that. So like I said, that community is kind of what helped to change me and to get me to the point in my life where a lot of where I am today. I had a lot of people volunteer time to take me out for meals. I had caseworkers and social workers that signed me up for programs. I went to church, and I had a lot of church people that were invested in me. And a lot of people didn't have to do this, but they wanted to see they wanted to see change. And so had it been for these people, there's no saying where I would be at today, because it took each and every person that invested in me, teachers, counselors, everybody. So now, because of that, I get to share kind of my story and where I'm at and things like that. So because my parents adopted me, my husband, when we was also adopted, we'd find that out later after we started dating. So something on our heart was always to adopt, and we wanted to be able to adopt a family out of, or a kid out of foster care. This process would become one of the hardest. I'm talking about you. Do you want to say hi? Well, not right now.
Well, I need to take Carson home.
Okay.
And can I stay?
Yes, you can go play. Yep. You want to say hi?
Yeah.
Okay. Say hi.
Hi.
All right, go play, okay?
Why is there pictures of me?
Because I'm telling them about your adoption. Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
So through this process, we did what was an interstate compact. My husband and I had built our first home over in Missouri, and so we would have to do a cross state lines adoption. This was the first time since I had been in foster care where I had social workers coming in and out of the home. I had, people doing a wellness check. I had people, inspecting my home. Almost like a traumatic experience in itself, because I thought I gave all that up. We would be in the process over COVID, and there would be a lot of things that would occur, red tapes that I would have to send lots of emails back and forth and things, trying to get the process moving and continuing to move. So October 9th of 2020, we officially got the news that our adoption went through. We did court online, so we actually didn't know if it had been finalized or not, because it was COVID. And so I remember teaching at the school and my husband calling me in the middle of the day, and I thinking, this is really weird. He never calls me in the middle of the day. He knows I'm teaching. Why is he calling me? So I step out, and he is working for this company that's Christ centered, and they're in the middle of their prayer meeting, and he had got a call from the attorney at that time. And so he answers the call, and he gets to find out with like all of his coworkers, and then calls me with his coworkers to let me know the adoption had gone through. It was one of those emotional times where you feel like a whole weight is lifted off of you. We kind of put our lives on hold. We wanted her to be a part of everything. And so we stopped taking trips, we stopped going places because we wanted her to be a part of that. So this video I'm about to show is the first time after the adoption, that she says her name. What's your name? Yay! So I feel like because I kind of got to go full circle, I experienced what foster care is like, I got to experience being a foster parent and adoption. It's really helped to open my eyes to the world, and share my experiences with those. Oh, there we go. So the next, several slides, we're just going to go over some like basic things that I feel like with all my training and things like that I've learned that help, and maybe it'll be helpful for you. But we've all seen these, we all know. Most of you guys are foster families yourselves, but a majority of kids are not removed from their homes because of sexual abuse or alcohol. It's because of neglect, and that neglect has prevented them from that basic tier living. So we know, everybody's seen these again, that there's those basic needs that have to be met. And so the psychological needs of, a consistent home and our food, drinks, water, all of those things have to be met. And so for me, that was one of those things that I had not had before going into foster care. I moved from home to home. We moved around a lot. I was really malnourished. I didn't go to the doctor or the dentist, all of those things. Safety. I was exposed to things that a lot of kids were never exposed to: drugs, alcohol, random people around, things like that. Just because I had parents didn't mean there was loving belonging. It wasn't really until probably my parents, now that I really figured out that your parents are supposed to love you. They met my needs. They cared for me when I was sick. They took care of me. And then I had to get that self-esteem and self-actualization. And so I think, obviously going through this, you could see that I had to meet each of these before I could meet the next one. And so once all of those were met, then I was able to have that self-actualization of, no, this is truly what I want with my life. This is where I need to be. And so I was able to advocate for myself. And so because of all this, there's a lot of things that I've learned, and I've been able to help a lot of kids with it. Past behavior predicts future behavior. So we know that most of these kids that are coming in have come from backgrounds that have been traumatic. They've experienced things that we haven't done. They've been allowed to say things or do things to you or to their parents and then reflect on you. And so it takes that environment and changing the environment to change that behavior. Um, so remembering that, we have to create that home environment so that the kids can flourish, so that they can grow. And so, back to behavior a little bit, is that behavior is learned. It occurs for a reason. It doesn't happen out of the blue. It continues to happen because it's effective. And so as we are talking about behavior and things like that in our homes, we have to look at that environment and why it's still effective. And then they eventually stop because they're not effective. But remembering there are things that are out of our control. And thinking about things that these kids may have had to go through: hunger, tired, inconsistencies. They're seeking a connection. Are they overstimulated? So one of your hardest job is figuring out why. Pairing, and building that rapport was one of those things that I realized early on that the foster families did for me. They didn't first come at me with, these are the rules, these are what I expect. They spent time getting to know me. They, tried to build a relationship. They, would sit and play a game with me on the floor. They wanted me, they wanted to give me an opportunity to grow without having to put a whole lot of boundaries on at first. Offering a lot of this I don't realize until now, but things they were doing. So like offering me sheets and my own bedding and things like that, built that trust so that I could know that they were going to support those basic needs. Playing video games, watching a movie together, all of those things I was able to build rapport initially with the families. And so some of these are ways to show that rapport, ask their name, make sure you're listening, ask questions, show that empathy, find a common ground, be genuine, and lead. And that's going to help build that rapport off the bat. Here's this is another picture of my parents with our girl that we adopted, with just some other ways to build rapport. And then once you've established that rapport, then that's when you can set boundaries. Kids in foster care need boundaries. My own kids need boundaries. Everybody needs boundaries. And so these are just some examples of ways you can set out boundaries. But it becomes pretty black and white because a lot of these kids have not had black and white before. So, technology, the thing that's taking over our world, technology at the dinner table. The family room is where you have to have all your screens. You have to, have it off at specific times. So these boundaries are things that you have to establish yourself and figure out what works well in your house. But for me, the boundaries that were set when I went into foster care were the boundary helped to establish that I wasn't in charge, or I no longer had to take care of myself, that somebody else was. And then same, food and drinks and crafts and coloring. These are just examples, but they definitely help to set the tone for what your expectations are and how you're going to establish those expectations in your home. And then routines. This was the other thing that became pretty prominent in my life. Something that really I had not had before was those morning and bedtime and meal routines. Each of these are individualized to what the kids need, but what does that look like in your home? And so thinking about our routines and how we do routines and things like that were really important for me. And then those expectations. I think as far as I learned that I had to get along with others. And so, what are the expectations that occur in your home? Um, And so it can be, as simple as the things I have listed or, other things that work well for you. Um, are those expectations going to be, once a week, we're going to have a family meeting? Or once a week, we are going to do something together as a group and play a game. Um, and then letting them know that like conflict can happen, but it has to happen when everybody's calm and rational. So how do we connect all these expectations and routines and things like that? We, as caregivers, need to use that predictable language. If this occurs, then this is going to happen. Um, and then for those behaviors that are occurring, um, how do we teach replacement behaviors for them? So a kid is screaming and yelling at you because you took something away. How do we teach those behaviors when they are not in that irrational state of mind? Because we want to teach them that things, there's appropriate ways to get what you want without having to engage in the behaviors. Um, but remembering that behaviors are just like an academic deficit, there's a behavior deficit. So we have to look at behaviors in a different viewpoint than them just doing this to get on our nerves or doing this to make us angry. Um, so one of the basic things we can do is begin to analyze those behaviors as they are occurring. We know that you can have the greatest rapport, all these things, but you're dealing with kids that have very traumatic backgrounds. So we talk about the ABCs of behavior and that antecedent strategy of what's going on before. And so, as foster parents, we need to look at, as we see patterns of behavior, how do we break it down and try to see what the overarching thing is? So, that antecedent, what's happening before, what's going on, who's present. And then looking at, that environment, those routines, people in the room, are they hungry, sick, or in pain? All of those things are factors that we have to include when we're looking at antecedents. And then the behavior. What is that thing that's occurring over and over again that the child's doing that is making it hard? And so taking those behaviors, are they deficit or are they excesses? Are they lacking basic learning skills? Are they lacking communication? Are they lacking attention? Or are they being disruptive and aggressive and breaking rules? But at the end of the day, what are they trying to communicate? What are they trying to get out of this behavior? And then the consequence, thinking about what's happening after. It can be a good or a bad thing. So they get away from the people they don't like. They get to leave an environment that's noisy. People give them something they want. Work is taken away. In the past, when I've screamed and yelled at an adult, then they have let me do whatever I wanted. Or in the past, when I've screamed and yelled at an adult, that trauma left momentarily and I got to escape it. So as foster parents, you guys are experiencing things that you may not know have occurred in the past. But there are things that you can do, especially before you go and do things. And that's, setting up the expectations before. So, letting them know before you can play on your video games, my expectation is you clean your room for 5 minutes, or before you can go outside and play, you need to do X, Y, and Z. But it's setting that expectation and letting them know exactly what's occurring or needs to occur right away. Those difficult tasks or those times where things are harder, as you're seeing a pattern and trend, letting them know what you expect, what behaviors do you expect to see, the time it's going to, like how long you're going to be doing it, and what's going to occur afterwards. Because that just provides that predictability. So these are just some basic strategies. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but I did want to leave a little bit of time in case anybody had any questions or anything like that for me.